Today we're going to have a brief look at cellular organelles, their functions, analogies of these organelles to everyday items, and we're going to determine what type of cells the organelles are found in. This presentation follows the cell organelle analogy chart that has been uploaded to our Canvas course. First of all, we want to take a look at the difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. On the left-hand side of the screen, we see some typical cells. First, the upper image shows us a typical animal cell that is surrounded by a cell membrane. On the right, we see a typical plant cell. In addition to the cell membrane, the plant cell is also surrounded by a rigid cell wall. On the bottom of the slide, we see a typical bacterial cell. This bacterial cell has a cell wall surrounding it, and you will note that it does not have many of the organelles that are seen in the animal and plant cell. This leads us to the difference between two major types of cells, and these are prokaryotic versus eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells, like the bacterial cell, do not have a membrane-bound nucleus. Their genetic material is not found surrounded by a membrane. Eukaryotic cells, like plant cells and animal cells, are characterized by a nucleus that contains their genetic material and has a membrane surrounding it, and many other membrane-bound organelles. Let's take a look at some of the organelles that we will typically see in a cell. First, we have the cytoskeleton. And the cytoskeleton is a system of microfilaments, intermediate filaments, and microtubules. These are all items that help to give structure to the cell. If we were to compare it to an everyday item, we could compare it to the support beams of a building because they help to maintain the structure of the cell. The cytoskeleton is found in all cells. Next, we have the nucleus. And the nucleus is kind of the control center, main office, or command central for the cell. It directs the activities of the cell. It contains chromosomes, which are our genetic material, and it also contains a nucleolus. We will find the nucleus in eukaryotic cells like plant and animal cells. The next organelle that we see is called the endoplasmic reticulum, and we have two types. First, we have the rough endoplasmic reticulum, and we call it rough because it has lots of ribosomes attached, giving it a rough outer appearance. Next, we have the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. It is similar in structure to the rough endoplasmic reticulum, but it does not have ribosomes attached. The rough endoplasmic reticulum is involved in protein synthesis, and that is because ribosomes will make protein and the endoplasmic reticulum will help to transfer that protein to another structure known as the Golgi apparatus. The smooth endoplasmic reticulum does not have ribosomes attached, and we will find that it is not involved in protein synthesis, but it is involved in lipid synthesis. When we use the term synthesis or synthesize, that means to make something. So the rough endoplasmic reticulum is involved in making protein because it transfers protein from the ribosomes to another organelle, and the smooth endoplasmic reticulum is involved in making lipids. If we were to compare the endoplasmic reticulum to an everyday structure, we could compare it to a department of transportation because it kind of helps to transport the proteins or lipids that they respectively make to another organelle, or we could compare it to a butcher shop because once the lipids and proteins are made, it helps to package them to send them to another structure within the cell. We will find the endoplasmic reticulum in both plant and animal cells. Our next organelle is called the ribosome, and the ribosome is involved in making protein. Ribosomes can be found attached to endoplasmic reticulum, making it the rough endoplasmic reticulum, or they can be found free in the cytoplasm. If we were to compare the ribosome to everyday structure or everyday object, we could compare it to a factory because this is where protein is made. Ribosomes are found in all cells. The next organelle on our list is called the Golgi apparatus or Golgi body. The Golgi body is very important to the cell because it receives proteins made by the ribosomes, transported by the rough endoplasmic reticulum. It takes those proteins and it modifies them. When we say modify, we mean that it may cleave or remove parts of the protein. It may add additional portions to the protein. And then the Golgi apparatus packages those proteins so that they can be exported or shipped out of the cell. The Golgi apparatus can be compared to FedEx or the post office because its job is to receive packages and then send them out or export them from the cell. The Golgi apparatus will be found in both plant and animal cells. The next organelle on our list is the mitochondrion. The plural of mitochondrion is mitochondria. On the left-hand side of our screen, we see the perfect example of what a mitochondrion looks like. Note that it has a double wall membrane. The inner membrane is thrown into folds called cristae, and this helps to increase the surface area of the mitochondrion. The mitochondrion is very important to the cell because it makes a high energy molecule known as ATP, and this helps to provide energy to the cell. It will do so through a process called cellular respiration, which we will examine in a further chapter. A good analogy for the mitochondrion is the powerhouse of the cell or the power plant of the cell because this is where the cell is going to make its energy. We will find mitochondria in both plant and animal cells. The next organelle on our list is the vacuole. And note, it is the fluid-filled, centralized portion that is being pointed to in the image on the right. In plant cells, vacuoles are found filled with fluid. They typically act to store water for plants. In animal cells, they can form storage centers that help in terms of storing food or help in terms of metabolism. A good analogy for the vacuole is a storage center or public storage because it holds on and effectively stores molecules for the cell. We will find vacuoles in both plant and animal cells. Next is our lysosome, and the lysosome is a very interesting organelle. It contains digestive enzymes, and these digestive enzymes are going to help to break down food. They also help to break out worn out parts of the cell. Inside the lysosome, we have enzyme complexes. And if we were to compare it to something, we can compare it to a garbage disposal or recycling center. The lysosome effectively breaks down products and will enable the cell to recycle anything that is reusable. We're going to find the lysosome in both plant and animal cells. Next on our list is the centriole, and the centriole has a distinctive shape, as you can see in the image on the right. The centriole is going to be very important in cell division. It helps to arrange portions of the cell's cytoskeleton. When we think of analogies for the centriole, we can think of two. We can either use a division symbol, and that is because the centriole helps the cell to divide, or we can use a multiplication symbol, and that is because centrioles are usually found perpendicular to each other. Next on our list is the cell wall, and the cell wall is going to be found only in plant and bacterial cells. It is a rigid outer layer that helps to support and protect the cell. An important function of the cell wall in bacteria is that it allows them to survive in watery environments. Without the cell wall, they would not be able to. When we think of a comparison to the cell wall, we can think of it as that strong outer barrier outside of a castle. It's the strongest defense or protective barrier that plant and bacterial cells have. The next organelle on our list is the chloroplast, and the chloroplast will only be found in plant cells. You should note that some chloroplasts can be found in algae as well. The chloroplasts are like solar panels for the cell. They help to collect the sun's energy, and that allows the chloroplast to produce energy for the cell through a process called photosynthesis. The chloroplast contains a green pigment called chlorophyll, and this is important in the process of photosynthesis in which the plant or algae will be able to make its own nutrients. The final item on our list is the cell membrane, and a lovely diagram of the cell membrane is found on the right of your screen. We can describe the cell membrane as being a fluid mosaic model because it is ever moving or ever changing. We can also describe it as a phospholipid bilayer because it contains phospholipids in an arrangement such that the hydrophilic or polar heads face the outside of water and face the outside of the cell and the interior of the cell where there are watery substances. Tucked neatly in between the phospholipid heads are the hydrophobic or fatty acid tails. The cell membrane is incredibly important because it regulates what enters and leaves the cell. Because it will only allow certain substances to pass through, we describe the cell as being selectively permeable. If we were to think of an analogy of the cell membrane, we could compare it to a security fence with gates surrounding a home. And this is because it has specific points of entry for certain molecules. We will find the cell membrane in all cells. This ends the review of organelles that we would typically see in cells. Thank you.